Fab Friday. Speaking of fab, I'm very happy to have joining me this morning from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, Attorney Dan Lennington. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yes, indeed. It certainly is. So let's, the first person I thought of this morning when I was reading all of these headlines about our United States Supreme Court, I was like, Dan Lennington needs to jump on because I wanted you to comment on these decisions. And I mean, these aren't a divided court. Some of these are unanimous decisions. I mean, what the heck's going on? Is there less PFAS in the water there in the DC area or more?
Yeah, these are really interesting. Just to let your listeners, who aren't following the Supreme Court all the time, the Supreme Court's term basically follows the school year. And so that's always sort of good to remember. They start in about September, October, and then they end in about June. And so at the end of June, you start to get the most, controversial or most high-profile opinions from the court. So when the court struck down affirmative action, it was at the end of June. When they established a right to gay marriage is at the end of June. So June, starting about now and through the next 3 weeks, we're going to get very high-profile cases. And yesterday we got 3 of them that were all unanimous. Now, the first one I want to talk about actually comes out of Wisconsin because it kind of highlights the problem with our own Wisconsin Supreme Court. It's a case involving Catholic Charities of Wisconsin. And Wisconsin law exempts, as you would expect, certain religious organizations from paying taxes, and especially paying unemployment taxes. And so your churches, they don't have to pay this. And most, religious charities don't have to pay this. But Catholic charities sought this exemption and was denied from the state of Wisconsin and brought an appeal up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court last year. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that Catholic Charities was not a religious organization that was eligible for this exemption because, number one, Catholic Charities serves non-Catholics, and number two, the mission of the organization is not specifically to spread the Catholic faith. The word they use is proselytize. So the Catholic Charities don't proselytize. And Justice Karofsky, Protasewicz, Ann Walsh Bradley, and Rebecca Dowlett all said, Catholic Charities, they're not a real religious organization, and so they have to pay taxes. That case, because it involved the freedom of religion, which is protected by the U.S. Constitution, Catholic Charities was able to do a direct appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is something that happens sometimes when a state Supreme Court makes such a horrible decision like this. You can go straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in a unanimous opinion written by probably the most liberal and progressive justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, reversed Justices Karofsky, Protasewicz, Ann Walsh Bradley, and Dowlett and said, you guys are completely wrong. The First Amendment prohibits discrimination among religions, and Wisconsin, in this case, was essentially determining that Catholic Charities was not Catholic enough. It was not religious enough. It should have been, proselytizing when it was running soup kitchens and clothing drives and helping, immigrants and all the things that Catholic Charities does. And that we don't think, you can't just say we don't think that you're Catholic enough. There is a non-discrimination element to the First Amendment that you can't give preference to one religion over another. There were a lot of religious charity organizations that were actually qualifying for this. And so you can't sort of pick and choose which religions to favor and which ones not to. And also I should point out, although I'm sort of dumping all over the liberals on the Wisconsin Supreme Court that got reversed unanimously, this case was pushed by Josh Call's Attorney General, the Attorney General of Wisconsin, and his minions were the ones that brought it up to the U.S. or that had to argue at the U.S. Supreme Court that it was totally fine to discriminate against Catholics. So this is yet another sort of anti-Catholic position taken by Attorney General Call, and there's sort of a long history with that and his mother, and who was the previous Attorney General. And so, this is a really blot on the Wisconsin Supreme Court's liberal majority and a blot on the Wisconsin Department of Justice and Attorney General Josh Call, who thought it was okay to defend this discrimination against Catholics.
So do you think, and I mean this is of course speculation, that those on the left, including Josh Call, they just throw a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see what sticks and fully expecting to have decisions like this or, I guess issues like this be overturned by a higher court?
We Wisconsin, especially the Democrats and the progressives, have this history in Wisconsin. We actually have a long history of religious discrimination here, a lot of anti-Catholic discrimination that has been going on in Wisconsin. We had a case that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court about buses and whether Catholic schools could get access to school buses that other Christian schools could also. We won that case at will. There's been other cases about sort of like forcing, Amish people to do things, to go to compulsory education, public education that Wisconsin tried to do in the past that got overturned. There's all sorts of these religious discrimination cases that come out of Wisconsin. I don't know what it is about Wisconsin that particularly makes us so secular and so progressive that we are not accommodating of Catholic religion or other religions in Wisconsin, but it is a troubling trend, and it has been going on for decades. And this is just another example of that. The idea that the Catholic Charities of Wisconsin is not Catholic enough. It's just an outrageous thing to say in a country that was founded on the freedom of religion. The free exercise of religion is really why we're all here in America. That's why the Pilgrims came here. That's why America was established in many ways, was because of freedom of religion, in addition to all the other rights that we cherish. But freedom of religion is really kind of this cornerstone about why America is here in the first place. And so for these progressives in Wisconsin to have this sort of anti-Catholic, anti-Christian viewpoint is just really sad, and I'm glad that even the most liberal Supreme Court justices in Washington, D.C. thought that it was pretty outrageous what our four liberal justices tried to pull off here.
I wondered that same thing, why Wisconsin, Dan, and so I remember, and as you were saying that, I remembered looking into this, and I realized, so that organization called Freedom from Religion Foundation is headquartered, their national headquarters is in Madison and was established or started in 1976. So that is likely, this group that, I don't know, hates God, hates religion, hates faith. I don't know. It's a group of atheists or secularists that have it doesn't surprise me, I guess, that they're headquartered in Madison, but that may very well explain why we have all these issues coming up in Wisconsin.
Yes, it may equality among religions is very important, and there was also a second case yesterday that dealt with equality. And it came out of Ohio. It was a woman named Marlene Ames, who was a straight white woman who worked for the state of Ohio, and she applied for a promotion and was denied the promotion, and the promotion was given to a lesbian woman in the office. And then a while later, Marlene was demoted, and her old job was given to a gay man. And she filed a lawsuit saying, "Whoa, this sounds a little bit like discrimination based on my sexual orientation, which is, protected by Title VII and federal civil rights laws. And the federal courts in Ohio said, no, you are a straight white woman, and straight people, they don't get the same level of protection as LGBTQ people. You have to prove extra things. You have to make an extra showing in your case in order to even get to trial. And so Marlene's case was dismissed because she was a straight white woman. And again, the case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and yesterday, unanimous decision. Again, this one written by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is the newest justice, and some may say the most liberal, most progressive justice appointed in quite a while, and appointed by President Biden. And she said, no, the federal civil rights laws that protect you from race discrimination or sex discrimination or discrimination based on your sexuality, those apply equally to everybody. There's no majority rule or exception that if you're in a majority group like whites, you don't get the same protections as blacks, or if you're straight, you don't get the same protections as a non-straight person. The law protects, and this is very important, the law protects individuals. It doesn't protect groups. Our civil rights laws and our Constitution are not about groups. It's about individuals. So if you at your job are fired or demoted or you don't get a promotion because of your sex or because of your sexual preferences, identities, or if you're fired because you won't submit to the sexual advances of your boss, it's called sexual harassment, that those things are all protected and that you have a right to sue over those sorts of things. And we don't have diminished rights for people who are in certain groups like white people or men or women. Clarence Thomas wrote a concurrence, and he said that the ridiculous thing about this, quote, majority group issue is how do you define who's in the majority? Women are in the majority in America everywhere. So are men supposed to get special rights because men are in the minority everywhere? Just as a matter of biology, there's always more women than men. And he said, well, what about a place like Detroit, Michigan? If you go to Detroit, there's more blacks than whites. And so does that mean that blacks have diminished rights in Detroit because they're in the majority? He said, of course not. Of course that's not true. And so our laws protect people as individuals, not as members of groups, and certain groups don't get special treatment. And this is the whole basis of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is that certain groups should be favored over others so that we can racially balance outcomes. That's the whole idea behind it. And so this unanimous decision says that's wrong. That's absolutely all wrong. Everyone has equal rights. Everyone has an equal shot at the American dream. And we should stop dividing up people by racial groups. And it's great to see that opinion come from a unanimous Supreme Court again, because a lot of judges around the country, a lot of HR managers and employers are under a completely different belief system right now, and it's great to have this authoritative decision come down yesterday.
So do you think it will affect, I'll just use the example, one of my sons has to, because it's Pride Month, his employer requires him to view some sort of video on the LGBTQ movement and how to conduct yourself as an employee, as it applies to the LGBTQ community. Do you think that this decision yesterday will have an effect on that type of corporate policy?
Well, these are tough questions, and these are bound up in facts and what exactly is going on. But I would say that employees definitely have a right to make a religious objection to things that their faith conflicts with, as we have brought a lawsuit on behalf of Spencer Wimmer from Wisconsin, who was fired by Generac because he refused. He actually just raised questions about pronouns with a transgender employee because he had a religious objection to using the right pronouns. An employer, of course, is allowed to speak themselves. They can tell you things. They can take positions. For corporations do have their own First Amendment rights, and they can say ridiculous things and support ridiculous causes. That's their right, just like it's your right to support ridiculous causes if you want to. But they can't compel you to believe something. They cannot compel you to say something contrary to your religious beliefs. And they can't treat you differently because you're straight or white or a male. And so it all depends on what's going on in a particular circumstances. But yes, absolutely. Employees have rights to the freedom of religion under Title VII, and they are allowed to get accommodations from their employer. And they shouldn't feel any religious harassment. They shouldn't feel from their employer that they're less than, that they're ineligible for certain benefits or promotions because they have the wrong religious beliefs. That's all protected by Title VII and the federal civil rights laws. And so employers should be cautious when an employee makes a religious objection. But I would say to people who do have deeply held religious convictions about issues going on in Pride Month, and especially with their employer, that they should make their objections known to their HR professionals or their managers if that's what they strongly believe, because federal civil rights law does protect your religious beliefs in the workplace. And so you should talk to a lawyer if you have an issue like this. It's very sensitive, and people should be very cautious because obviously you can lose your job. You can get fired, and nobody wants to have to go through the process of suing their employer, and no one wants to be the person who sued their boss. So these are all very difficult questions, and I would suggest to people reach out to lawyers or call Will. Go to our website, will-law.org, if you're struggling with these sorts of issues, because you don't want to make a mistake that could forever ruin your career, especially if you have not evaluated all the legal consequences. But yes, Title VII protects religious beliefs in the workplace. That's the short answer.
All right. Well, Dan Lennington from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, look forward to seeing you next Tuesday the 10th at a Will event.